Welcome everyone. See a lot of folks coming in here now. We'll give it a few more minutes and see how many people will be here today. Teresa, hi. It's good to see you from Arlington. Where are other people calling in from today? Put it in the chat box if you can. See if we've got the whole state covered. Wow, I think in the first 10, there's not a single repeat so far. What do we have? Cedar Woolley, Bellevue, Kent, West Seattle, Spokane Valley, SeaTac, Snowy Yakima, Bellingham, Ellensburg, Walla Walla, Everett, Kent, San Juan County, Seattle. A couple more Seattles with a cat. Very good. Any other cats in there? That's the rule, that if your cat, child, or dog, or ferret, or any other animal, I guess, is in there with you, they have to make an appearance. That's just a rule. Mukilteo, Aberdeen, Woodinville, Kitsap County, Seattle, Linwood, Lacey, really all over. Dogs are much too noisy. Adana, I hear that. My dog seems extra sensitive these days. I think he feels like he has to protect us more because we're home more often. So he's always in protective mode. Shoreline, Joe, good to see you. Well, Diane, it looks like we have about 60 folks. You want to give it another minute or two, or you think we should start?
I think we can probably go ahead and get started. I want to mention something really quick. You may have noticed I've got a background behind me, and Ivanova has the same thing. On the ARC's website, under Advocacy Days, if you would like to download a virtual background for the Zoom Advocacy Days, there'll be a different one each week so that you can participate in that if you'd like. And take it away, Jeremy.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking at that background now and I love it. I have such a hard time getting virtual backgrounds to work for me. I don't know if it's my lighting or my camera, but I'm going to play around with that and see. I'm going to go check it out. All right. Well, we have 62 people here now, and I'm looking through all of the different cities and counties from all across the state. So we'll go ahead and get started with the afternoon. There's a lot to cover. For those I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Jeremy Norden-Paul. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington State Developmental Disabilities Council, or the DD Council for short, or sometimes the DDC. And it is my true pleasure to welcome you to our annual Developmental Disabilities Briefing. Can we get some hands or emojis, celebration? Don't be shy with those reactions. I think there's 6 of them now you can play around with. You know, and it's strange because if you think back to just a year ago, just 1 year ago, we were all literally physically sitting together in the same room in downtown Olympia. And honestly, it's hard for me to believe how much things have changed since then. And I know I don't need to tell any of you this, but it has been an incredibly challenging year for so many reasons. It's felt like the blink of an eye, but it's also felt like 20 years at the same time. But one thing that we keep seeing and that keeps getting proven over and over again is just how strong and resilient and adaptive the DD community is. And I so appreciate every single one of you for being here this afternoon to hear about the important issues that our community is facing and really to figure out ways that we can advocate together, because we're always stronger together. That's always true. Before I continue, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that our friend and advocate, Tony Hall, a lot of you know him, is currently fighting COVID-19. And he's receiving intensive care at a hospital in Seattle. And as many of you know, Tony's been a huge part of our DD briefings and advocacy movement for a lot of years. And we definitely miss his presence today. So I hope you'll join me just for a few seconds to think about Tony and send him some love and some well wishes for a quick and full recovery. So I'm just gonna think about Tony for a few seconds and send him my thoughts. All right, we're wishing him a quick and full recovery. Thank you. I also want to take a quick minute to recognize the tremendous partnership between the DD Council, Self Advocates in Leadership, or SAIL, and the ARC for making this event and so many other events possible. You know, when people ask me what the DD Council does, you know, like, hey, what do you do? You'll often hear me say, the DD Council helps make the system work better for people. And it's a really simple statement, but it's a really big job, and definitely not one that we could do without our fabulous partners. So thank you to SAIL, the ARC, and all the other great people and organizations that are here today. Thank you for helping us, you know, do our job, which is make the system work better together. And I want to give extra special thanks to Stacy and Diana for working feverishly behind the scenes to create a smooth event for us today. So can we join me again in showing them some love and appreciation? We get to see the finished product here in these next 2 hours, but I'll tell you, there is an amazing amount of work that has gone into this, and all of our presenters too. So speaking of great partners, it is my absolute honor to hand it over to Ivanova Smith, who is the chair of Self Advocates in Leadership and a critical member of the advocacy community. So take it away, Ivanova.
Hello, I'm Ivanova Smith, and I am your chair for Self Advocates in Leadership SAIL, and I will be emceeing alongside Jeremy Norton Paul, and we're really excited to get Advocacy Days started. So take it away, Jeremy.
Thanks, Ivanova. And just a quick couple of reminders, housekeeping things. I think most of us are pretty good at Zoom these days. We've become Zoom pros, but just a reminder to keep yourself muted when you're not talking or presenting. That way we don't get any background noise or dogs barking or typing or anything like that. And we're gonna do our best to spotlight the person who's presenting. But if for some reason you're having a hard time seeing who's presenting, I think if you just click on their video and select spotlight or pin video, you should be able to see them. But we'll give it a shot. And if there's any challenges that come up, we'll deal with them. So for example, I think that Diana is now spotlighting me since I'm talking. So as we go throughout this program and we have different presenters, we'll do our best to spotlight whoever is talking. And I'll also say that please feel free to use the chat throughout the entire event. If you have comments or questions or some kind of challenge, put the chat in there and we'll do our best to address it. All right. So our program today is broken into 3 main sections. First, we're going to spend some time hearing from presenters about Governor Inslee's proposed operating budget. The second section is that we're going to go through our bills of interest for the 2021 legislative session. And third, we are going to review Governor Inslee's proposed capital budget. And after those 3 sections, we'll wrap up and see if anyone has any questions. And then we'll get out of here by about 4 o'clock to give folks a time to get some food and get ready to sign back in at 5:30 for the legislative reception. So with that, we're going to start our first section, which is going over some of the items in Governor Inslee's proposed operating budget. And if you are not familiar with the operating budget or the budget, there's 2 main parts of the budget. The operating side of the budget is money that we need to actually pay for the programs and the services and the people who are doing the work. And the other side of that is a capital budget, which is more about buildings and physical things. So the first person I'm going to welcome here to present to us is Darcy Ladwig, and she is going to talk to us about one piece of the operating budget, which is the new SOLAs for children, or the state-operated living alternative. So Darcy, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. So I'm Darcy Ladwig. I live in Spokane Valley, and this is my my right-hand woman, Zoe, my daughter, and we are going to share a little bit about the state-operated living alternatives for children that, so the SOLAs for children that are included in the governor's proposed operating budget. This would, the proposal puts aside $5,739,000 in general state funds, which allows us to access $4,945,000 in general federal funds. It would open up 15 new beds in 5 locations. So 3 individuals who are 20 or younger would have access to these SOLAs for out-of-home placement. I don't know if you've been aware, we've seen a lot of young people with developmental disabilities and behavioral health challenges ending up with unneeded acute hospital stays, single night foster placements, hotel stays, and out-of-state placements. And these all lack appropriate therapeutic care for individuals who experience disabilities and some behavior challenges. There's currently one children's SOLA, and it serves 3. Another will be developed in this fiscal year, 2021. And then the 5 new facilities would be phased in over the course of the biennium. These would, they would allow support for individuals to receive services in their community, which is so important. We don't want to see people placed out of state or lingering in the hospital when they don't have medical needs, or across the state and not near family members. And so it would increase opportunities for growth and development, synchronize those physical and behavioral health challenges, benefits, and coordinate education services so they could receive an education in the community with their peers. They would work to improve independent living skills and continue to strengthen the family relationships. And so we're pleased about this being included in the governor's budget, and hope that it is included in the House and Senate budgets.
Thank you so much, Darcy. And I do see a question here from Tracy. Has there been any information about where the proposed SOLAs would be located?
In researching, I did not see that. I don't know. So I don't know if I mentioned, I think the one that currently exists is here in the Spokane area. And so my personal hope would be that they would be throughout the state so that people could live fairly closely to their families.
And this is Diana. I'll jump in here for you, Darcy. In the notebook under the charts section, there does show where the proposed ones are going to be located. It's under the residential area in the notebook.
Thanks, Diana. And we can also share those links again here in the chat box here soon. Any other last questions for Darcy before we move on? All right, Darcy. Oh, go ahead, Diana.
Sorry, this is Diana again. And I did put the link to the operating budget chart in the chat box. So if people want to go look at that as we're going through the budget proposals and the bills, I will post them in the chat box as we get to them.
Perfect, thank you, Diana. And also just going back a couple of minutes when I was talking about Tony, I did get an update that if anyone is interested in getting updates about Tony, they can get a hold of Eric Mathis or Kyle Matheson, and those two will have the most updated information about Tony. All right. Okay, thank you, Darcy, for being our brave volunteer to go first. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Adana Protonentis to talk about the Children's Intensive In-Home Behavior Supports, or CIBS waiver. And I'll also say that Adana is one of our newest fabulous council members. So Adana, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. Hey, y'all. Good to see you. I made a couple of slides just in case you're visual folks like me, and it helps to have something to look at. So let's see if I can figure out how to share them. I don't know why I can't open this. I'm gonna try one more time. Here. I'm getting an error message. Can I send it to you, Diana?
Okay.
That work?
Sure, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I did because
Always with the technical difficulties. My goodness. It's my new Zoom reality.
Okay, so Dana, I just made you a co-host. If that'll let you share it.
Okay. I sent it to you just in case that doesn't work, because I don't want to waste everyone's time. Yeah, it's still saying I can't share.
Okay.
Hey, Diana, while you're opening it up and pulling it up, let's, if Sean is ready, we can go ahead and move on to the next one and just come back in a minute.
Sounds
good idea.
All right, Sean, go ahead and we're going to welcome you up to the stage, so to speak, here. And Sean's going to share with us about the proposed peer mentor program and also the reducing the footprint of Rainier proposal. So go ahead, Sean.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Latham, the Director of Allies and Advocacy. My preferred pronouns are he and him. To describe myself, I'm a middle-aged man with brown hair and eyes, sitting in a power wheelchair, and I have the Allies and Advocacy logo behind me. Allies is a nonprofit dedicated to fighting for the civil and equal rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or IDD. We do this by not only supporting legislation that helps people with IDD, but also making sure after bills become law, our state and local communities implement them correctly. We also assist all the other self-advocacy organizations to make sure as many people with IDD are heard and listened to in our state. One of Allies' dreams is to make sure whenever there are systematic changes to disability services, people with IDD are consulted before any changes are made, and not after, which unfortunately is the case a lot. This is why we are so happy and excited to support self-advocates in leaderships and People First proposed legislation called Nothing About Us Without Us that would accomplish part of our dream. We also feel like people with IDD should be considered for paid employment, especially from disability organizations. And Allies will be pushing for that. Now, a big issue Allies and other self-advocate organizations have been fighting for is the closure of all the residential habilitation centers. It is our belief every individual, including those with IDD, deserves to live in the community. With the additions of state-operated living alternatives, or SOLID, to other DD housing options like supported living facilities, adult family homes, companion homes, and direct services in a person's own home, we feel like there is a suitable number of options for everyone. Self-advocates also feel that every kind of service, including nursing skilled services, should not just be available in outdated congregate settings. People with high-level needs, like myself, don't want to give up our independence just to get health and medical services. We want these services to be provided in a person's home, or at least in a small community setting, as I talked about earlier. This is why Allies and our partners are fighting for more resources in the community, like more money for residential services, more money for in-home care, as well as fighting against proposals to remodel or repair outdated residential habilitation centers at Faircrest, Rainier, Lakeland Village, and Yakima Valley School, as well as expanding or continuing services at these grounds, where only a fraction of individuals are served. We feel like that money would be better spent building out new community residential options and community services. If you are a self-advocate and you agree with our take on this issue, I encourage you to speak to us at Allies, or SAIL, or People First of Washington. If we want to change our current structure, we need to hear from you. Thank you.
I apologize. I met us on a peer mentoring issue.
That's no problem, Sean. Do you want to say anything more about the peer mentoring part?
I believe I haven't been following it as much. I believe it's very helpful for people to have peer mentors. They're gonna help people learn how to testify, how to be an advocate. We are in support of the peer mentor.
Thanks, Sean. And as a lot of you know, the Family Mentor Project has been a very long-standing, successful program helping folks transition out of institutions. And so this is an acknowledgement that not only is that a successful program, but that it would benefit from a peer mentoring aspect, to have people with disabilities who have left institutions to serve as mentors for other people who are considering doing the same. So thank you, Sean. Are there any questions for Sean or any comments that anyone wants to add? All right, and I'll just say that if you think of some questions for later, you know, we'll have time later for questions. And if there's anyone you want to contact separately, I'm sure they'd be happy to share their email address or phone number. So, and I wanted to say, Sean, thank you for the, actually, Christine, do you have your hand raised? Go ahead.
I do. So I wholeheartedly agree with clients needing to live in the community. I am an adult case manager for Skagit County, as well as the San Juan Islands for Developmental Disabilities Administration. But I am concerned about some of the things that have already been brought up in terms of not having behavioral health services. So I'm wondering if there's something in that bill that you were just referring to about institutions to allow for the understanding of more behavioral health services and people that are actually experienced working with our population. I struggle with this a lot in my community, and I know, Sean, you and I live in the same community, so you're probably well aware of the struggle. It's a very frustrating struggle for myself as a case manager to try to get services in the mental health world for my clients who have dual diagnoses. So I'm just, my concern is that while I don't want to take away from the independence of my clients, I also worry that some people have no transition plan to go out of those RHCs. So that's what I'm worried about as a case manager. And I will truly confess, I have never worked with someone that's come out of an RHC, so I don't know what that looks like. All of my clients live with their families and or in their own homes. So this is me being not sure if I'm asking the right question as well.
Well, Christine, I really appreciate you asking the question, and I'll do my best to give a quick response, and then I'd be happy to continue the conversation later separately. But
Thank you, Jeremy.
I will say that there is actually a bill. It's Senate Bill 5268, we'll talk about later, actually would, one of the things it would do is it would require DDA to start that transition planning with every single person who currently lives at an RHC. The second that they're there, basically, that they are already talking about leaving. And so that everyone would be required to have a very strong person-centered transition plan to leave. And so I think that gets to your question around the transition planning. And that's just the best practice generally that we want to make sure that everyone has. But second, I'll say that is a real challenge. You know, oftentimes people will say that one of the reasons to keep institutions or to keep RHCs is for people who have really significant behavior needs or who have crisis, who experience a crisis or need some kind of intensive support. And I think one of the things that we're advocating for is to invest in community-based support options for people, so that when people experience a crisis or need more intensive behavior support, that there are options in the community to receive that in their own home, so they never actually have to leave their home, or some other community-based setting, so that we don't have to keep sending people back to RHCs as their last resort. I think for years it's become the last resort for people, but if our legislature made the conscious decision to invest in community-based options, then that's what we would have. And we would have ability for people to have that in the community. So I think that's one of the things we're advocating for strongly. So we could talk about that all day, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on and ask Diana, are you ready to pull up the slides for Dana? Okay.
Yes, I have those.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks so much for your patience and grace, everyone. I appreciate it. Hopefully the slides are pretty enough to be worth the wait. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the SIBS waiver, or the Children's Intensive In-Home Behavioral Support Waiver. And on the next slide, it kind of walks through that the SIBS waiver was created to solve a problem that we were having that actually is kind of in alignment with what Jeremy was just speaking about, which is a lack of options, in this case for families with children, when those children were having intensive behavioral challenges that were beyond the skill and capacity of their parents to support. So you'd have kids who would reach a point where sometimes their behavior was dangerous to themselves or to others, and their family just didn't have what they needed in order to be able to support their child well and help them get through that crisis and address that behavior. And there are a couple of things that created the conditions for this to be a really big problem. So first of all, Washington has not made robust investments in community-based options. So if parents were in this situation with children, or rather really, let's center the kids, right? If the children were in the situation of having behavior that they needed help managing, there weren't a lot of options in the community for them. Also, Washington still operates institutions, of course, and so that ends up being the tool that folks look for because there aren't any other tools in the toolbox. And big problem being institutions are not appropriate for anyone, but they're especially not appropriate for children. And before the SIBS waiver was in place, children as young as 7 years old were being sent to RHCs because there weren't other options available. Can we have the next slide, please, Diana? So the solution was to create the SIBS waiver. The SIBS waiver has 3 component parts. First is intensive case management. So the caseload ratio for those case managers is a lot lower than what's usual. There's a lot of quality control measures in place, a lot of follow-up activities, just like much more engagement with those case managers. Part 2, which I think is really, really crucial, is positive behavior support. There's a really big family involvement component there, and a lot of emphasis on skill development, on helping parents and kids develop the skills they're going to need so that they can manage to stay in the home together. And then part 3 is focusing on a wraparound approach. So imagine like the kid is the heart in the middle of that graphic, and you're just building like circles and circles and circles of family and team and community around them to wrap them and hold them and offer them the care and support that they need. And folks do that through child and family-centered teams of support who meet very frequently and cross-system collaboration. Next slide, please. So it's a program that is for children, of course. So it's for, you have to be eligible, you have to be between the ages of 8 and 17. It expires at the age of 20. As with most DDA administered programs, it's for folks who have an ASD diagnosis or another intellectual or developmental disability designation. It's for people who are at high risk of out-of-home placement. Usually that has a lot to do with a combination of all these factors on the slide, but especially this high behavior acuity piece. That's about behavior that is both dangerous and severe. So whether that's being dangerous to themselves or to somebody else, and in a way that is quite severe, that puts their caregivers at risk, for example. And a big piece of the puzzle, again, I keep talking about family, is that the family has to be willing to participate. This is a lot about a team approach and family skill development as much as it is about child skill development. Next slide, please. So the outcomes are pretty great. These are the goals of the program, and largely they're pretty darn successful, right? That you avoid the trauma of separating children and families. Kids get to grow up and experience family life. The families get to grow their confidence and their ability to keep their child safe and to keep others safe. There's a decrease in the behaviors of the child that are interfering with their quality of life so that they can just feel better, I think, which is awesome. Increase in skill development, that's again for both the child and the family. So there might be skills and coping strategies that the child is learning around emotional regulation, for example. At the same time, their parents or caregivers are learning a lot of skills as well about how to support their child, how to de-escalate when needed, how to create a home environment that is going to meet their child's needs. And ultimately, we're looking for greater self-expression, improved relationships, and independence. It's really cheap. It's surprisingly inexpensive. So to put a kid into a licensed staff residential space, an LSR, is $10,000 per child per month. If we put them in an RHC, which is what they were doing before SIBS waivers, it's $16,000 per kid per month. A SIBS waiver is $4,000 per kid per month. It's not nearly as much money. And when you expand that and you look at statewide, currently there are only 100 spots in the SIBS program. That cost is $4.8 million a year. To serve the same number of kids in an LSR, that would be $13 million. To serve a same number of kids in an RHC would be $20 million. So this is a much more efficient investment, and it keeps our kids and families together. Next slide. So here's the ask, right? The call to action. The ask is that the governor's proposed budget doubles the number of spots that are available from 100 to 200. And we really, really, really want our senators and our representatives to support that idea and mirror that in their own proposed budgets. It is a very efficient investment. It keeps kids and families together. I can't really think of anything that would be bad. I don't see any downsides here with regard to investing in our kids and our communities and our families and promoting caring. So we really, 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 really want this and would love your help advocating for it. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Dana. You know, when you shared those numbers, those are obviously very impactful and helpful. But there's another thing you said that's even more important, which is that it's about keeping families together. I think that can be a North Star for us as we continue supporting that. So are there any questions for Dana before we move on, or any comments?
Well, this is Carrie Cunningham Rosvick, and thank you for all that very excellent information. I just wanted to say that I was looking at Healthy People. It's a website out of, it's an organization out of the Department of Health and Human Services and some connection to the CDC. So it's a federal entity, or and so what they do is they try to, it has to do with health, and I'll keep this short, but improving the health of citizens in the US. They have determined an objective. One objective is to reduce the proportion of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who live in institutional settings with 7 or more people. So that is an objective over the next 10 years. They would like to be able to measure a decrease. And so I'm going to follow up with this because I don't know, once they determine something's an objective, does that mean there's money that flows toward it? But I think it's also important at the federal level, there is recognition that people need to be living in the community. So, and I don't know if it includes children, but I'm going to follow up and see what it is I can find out about the process for that.
That sounds great.
All right, thanks, Carrie. I think we have time for one more quick comment, and if anyone happens to know the answer to this, I think there's probably different answers depending on your perspective. But how many spots do we really need? You know, 200 is great because it's doubling, but if the sky were the limit, what is the actual number of families who would need access to that waiver?
Mm-hmm. And you know, I think some of it depends on, there's an algorithm that the DDA is using to determine eligibility criteria. And that came out of a research study where they compared characteristics between kids who were in residential homes or residential habilitation centers, a control group, and kids who were high risk, and tried to kind of figure out what's at the center of that Venn diagram and then build a forecast model around it. But I imagine, you know, like what happens to the kids who are just shy of scoring high enough to get us one of those 100 spots? I'm sure that the number could just go higher and higher. I haven't been able to find data anywhere. I've been all over DDA's website and the DSHS website and combing through the reports, trying to get a sense of, is there a waiting list even, and how many kids are on it and how does it function? I'm not sure. I assume that Governor Inslee had something to rely on when he made the decision to propose doubling the number of spots available, but I'm not sure where that information came from.
Thank you,
Well,
Dana.
This is Diana. I'm going to jump in here real quick. And as far as the number of children waiting for a waiver spot, the problem is that there's some on that list, but there are a lot of parents that don't know. They have to make a specific service request for a waiver spot to get on that service request list for that waiver. And that's part of why we don't know the real numbers.
It's a good point, Diana. And I'll also just brag on Carrie for a second. Carrie Cunningham-Rosvick is the one who was talking a minute ago. She's in a Doctor of Nursing program and doing a lot of research lately. And she is a self-identified data fan. She's passionate about data. And so I'm sure that if anyone here is really interested in talking more about data and numbers, that she'd be interested in talking with you. So thank you, Dana, and thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott Livengood so that he can talk about personal protective equipment, or PPE, and supported living as they relate to the proposed operating budget. So Scott, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Scott Livengood. I direct Alpha Supported Living Services, which is a supported living agency that serves Kings, Snohomish, and Spokane counties, and I serve as the legislative chair for the statewide association, CRSA. So it is true that in the governor's proposed budget, there was some allocations for PPE, but primarily that is for in-home care providers and DDA staff. So it's not much that's available to supported living. Only on an emergency basis is when you can request that. Our request is a little bit different, and it was not included in the governor's proposed budget. So COVID-19 has significantly impacted providers during this pandemic, and almost every one of the 140 supported living providers across the state, serving about 4,500 people, have been impacted in some way or another. As of this week, 637 supported living clients have tested positive for COVID, and that's nearly 14% of the clients who are served in the residential setting, which is extremely concerning. But in comparison, it's still lower than the nearly 19% of the clients in RHCs that have tested positive during that same time. Since March, 31 supported living clients have passed away from COVID-19, which again is extremely concerning, but it follows the national pattern we've seen in recent papers around 2 to 3 times the mortality rate of the general population. So the numbers reached the highest in December, but we're now seeing those come down a little bit. Agencies have experienced extreme costs over the 10-month period of the pandemic, from hazard pay, lodging, PPE that we were just talking about, additional expenses you're going to see around labor. And so we do have additional enhanced rates that are in our budgets, in our rates right now. And so our first ask is to continue that. The pandemic obviously is not over, and supported living currently is right in the midst of all of the vaccine programs that are going on. So we're requesting that those enhanced rates continue. In House Bill 1368, which is the early action bill, it does continue the enhanced rates through June, which again, currently they are ending in March. So that's a great thing, and we do support that. But we do need it to continue probably past June, just because we're not even going to be through all the vaccinations until the end of March, and the participation rate at this is not at the level that providers need to see. In addition to that, our other part of our ask is a 2% provider rate increase for next January. Currently, there's nothing in place, and we need to keep ahead of minimum wage, and that's sort of the average of what minimum wage has been increasing by. So that ask is 10.5 million general fund state. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions or comments about what Scott is sharing?
Scott, this is Carrie. Could you tell me the bill numbers again? I don't have them, and that would be helpful.
Yeah, 1368 is the one that continues it through June. So that's an early action for the current biennium we're in. And then we're just waiting for the allocation appropriation in the biennium budget going forward. But 1368, I don't have the Senate Bill Companion in front of me though.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Carrie. Anyone else? Betty has a question. Do you have a proposal for how long you need the enhanced rate, Scott?
So what we provided to legislators is a per month cost, just because none of us know when the state of emergency will end. So that's 3.35 million general fund state per month to continue the enhanced rates. In conversations, we're essentially saying probably through the end of this year, not fiscal year, but calendar year.
All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving, but if anyone wants to talk more about that, I'm sure that Scott would be happy to speak with you. And so now we're going to ask Karen Williams from the Community Employment Alliance and also Trillium to come talk to us about transition services, because there's an item in the proposed operating budget to fund eligible high school graduates and add them to the Basic Plus waiver. So Karen, it's all yours.
Hello, good afternoon. As Jeremy said, I am part of Community Employment Alliance, and while this does connect students exiting transition into the adult world, it does connect them to employment services. It actually connects them to everything that's on the waiver. So it's a $10 million ask roughly to get these exiting students onto the Basic Plus waiver. This has been supported in the past. This is one of the things we'd love to have forecasted so we don't have to ask every biennium. But I will say that it's great that it's being funded in the governor's budget, and we hope to see it in the House and Senate. We've testified accordingly. The one thing that's a reality check for us to keep in mind is it really is only funding 51% of the eligible students. So we have a major gap in our state in that of all this people who would be deemed eligible to connect to DDA services, only about 51% of them are connecting in that first year right out of school. And we know that that is a really hard transition for people and their families, because you're used to one-stop shopping at school, and then you get to be an adult and you have to sign up for SSI and DDA and transit and housing, and it's overwhelming. And so we definitely have room to grow to get better connectivity, but it's been supported in past. And so the one challenge we may have is they may look back at current enrollment, and because all the COVID impacts, a lot of schools were not doing their same resource and outreach and connectivity to DDA and case managers. And so they might say, well, you didn't even use all the spots we gave you last time. So hopefully look at that, because obviously 2020 grads, exiters, did not have a positive experience, and we're probably going to see that again with 2021. So hopefully they just go for all the spots, and then we can try to get people caught up as we go.
Thanks, Karen, for that overview. Are there any questions or comments for Karen?
Yes, this is Aruna. Wanted to know, when you say about transition services, in addition to employment, you said it covers everything. What other things are covered?
Yeah, well, it's a Basic Plus waiver, and I am not a waiver knowledgeable person per se, but a lot of times individuals are not accessing waiver services since birth to 3. A lot of people don't. And so in some ways it's a chance for them to get reconnected. So things like respite are available on that waiver as well. It's not just access to employment or community inclusion services. It's for the whole host of waiver eligible services that are through the Basic Plus waiver. Does that answer your question?
What I kind of think is, as a parent, that transition is more than employment, and it is the quality of life moving forward, housing, healthy coping strategies, healthy lifestyle, you know, and, you know, kind of making community connections and everything else. And that is the reason I was asking that question. You know, I would like to see, just like we have job coaches, have the life coach you know, persons who would be kind of adept at working with our population and helping them move forward in their lives so that they have quality of life as they move forward.
Well, I think there are programs like community engagement, but then also we were hearing earlier about the peer mentoring. So I think we have lots of opportunity for sure to improve the, not just the services that go for the individual, but also the services that are there to support them to stay in their home and have that full engaged life. So whether it's respite, personal care, community engagement, all those things, like you said, that make a full life.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, great question.
All right. Okay, so for our last presentation for this section, we're going to ask Stacy Dim to talk to us about the Dan Thompson Memorial Trust account. Often we have referred to that as the DD Community Trust. So Stacy, take it away.
Hi, yeah, it's always my pleasure to talk about this unique account that got created in anticipation of our state RHCs downsizing and or no longer being used. Because there's a great deal of valuable land that is committed to the RHCs, the question is always, what do we do about that land when we're not using it to support people with developmental disabilities any longer? And I know that Margaret Lee Thompson is on the Zoom. And so in honor of her, I want to make sure everybody knows that this account was named after her son, Dan Thompson, after he passed away, in an effort to acknowledge the contributions of Margaret Lee and the advocacy community, and with a vision of ensuring that people with developmental disabilities could live in the community. So this account was created in 2005 and was not really managed much for about 15 years. And then last year, Senator Braun was great at taking some leadership to make a few adjustments to the account. The bottom line is we've been spending a lot of time and energy figuring out three basic things. One is, how does money get into the account? What happens to the money and how is it managed while it's in this account? And then what's the process for spending the money? And that has changed over time. But right now, we've had some interesting changes that we want to just make sure everybody knows about. All four RHCs have land that is not necessary for operations. And if that land is leased or timber on that land is cut and sold, if any of the land is sold, or if there are any sort of conservation easements that are established to protect the environment in that area, any money from those activities goes into the Dan Thompson account. Last year, there was a change made that said the state will carefully invest that money and will manage it appropriately so that it is earning money. It won't be fair market value. It's not like it earns big dividends on the open market, but it is managed by the state in a very appropriate conservative way. And then money from the account can now be spent as appropriated by the legislature, but through a new process that's being developed with DDA and through the Developmental Disabilities Council. And we're excited about that because we have not really spent any money out of that account other than for studies and basic issues that have to do with managing the land. And so, Jeremy, I might ask you for a minute, since you're intimately involved in the conversation about how the DD Council will be good advisors for how to spend the money, if you want to talk about that just for a minute.
Yeah, Stacy, thank you. I'll do that. So as Stacy explained, money gets into this account and it's managed by the State Investment Board, but there's currently not a way for the money to ever get spent. And currently there's about $5 million in this account, and $2 million of that has been appropriated by the legislature to be spent, but there's still not a process to spend it on community projects. And so last year in Senate Bill 6190, there's a line that says DSHS must consult with the Developmental Disabilities Council and get recommendations for how to spend the funding. And so we are currently working out a process for where the DD Council would create an advisory committee to get input from the community and get applications from the community, ideas for projects. And then that committee would send those recommendations to DSHS. who would then have their own process for identifying what they're going to spend it on and getting the money out to those organizations or those people. So we're still working out some of those details. Our council members still need to vote on a couple of items to make it happen. And we'll certainly keep everyone updated. And I just wanted to say big thanks again to Margaret Lee Thompson, who has been incredibly helpful to me personally, piecing together all the different parts, history and different complicated parts of this history to move forward. So that's a brief overview. Hopefully soon we'll have a process to where the community can give input and ideas on how to spend the funding in impactful ways. Any questions about that?
There's one more thing I'll add, Jeremy, and that is that last year when we had these significant changes and clarifications to the accounts, the legislature committed that it would continue to contribute to the Dan Thompson account each year. Last year they contributed $1 million, and this year they are contributing or proposing to contribute $1 million. So we're watching for that as well.
And the last thing I'll say about that is I do have a presentation, some slides that will be finalized in the next couple of weeks. And if anyone is interested in having me share those with you or your organization, just to help educate people about what the account is and what's happening, I would be happy to share that with you as a resource. I think someone had a question or a comment.
No, it's Eric Mathis. I have a comment that I want to remind everyone. I've been hearing pretty much everything regarding money. Yes, that is good, but please remember, money follows a person, and the person comes first, and then we have money. Just wanted to mention that. So you have that in your mind as a seed that I just planted just now, so that you could think about that in the process of the conversations that we're having.
Thank you, Eric. An incredibly important reminder that we do talk a lot about money and funding, but when it comes down to it, it's about people and families. So thank you for that reminder.
You're welcome.
All right, so before we close out this section, I think, Diana, we might have a quick poll that we can do just to get people a chance to stretch their brains a little bit and do something different.
Yep, we do. Okay, I'm going to launch this poll now. So a blue and pink striped zebra walks into the Scherberg building at the legislature. Now, is he going in for a budget hearing in the House or the Senate if he goes in the Scherberg building? If you don't know, make a guess. And you have your options of House, Senate, or maybe he's not going to either one of those. Now, I don't see blue and pink zebras walking around the legislature every day, but in this strange world we live in, you just never know what you're going to see. Okay, so we'll give it a few seconds more and then we will end the polling. Okay, 1 minute. So let's look at what we got. 63% said the Senate, which is the correct answer if there was a blue and pink striped zebra walking around the legislature. Since those are very rare and I've never seen one, neither is also a good answer. So just so you remember, we have the House and the Senate they work in two different buildings, and the John L. O'Brien building is for the House members, and then the Scherberg building is for the Senate members. So just a little bit of trivia for you.
Thank you, Diane. Diana, that was really fun. Woohoo, the Senate. I got that right. I'm very proud of myself. And so now we are going to go over the bills of interest, which are really awesome this year. So the first one we're going to hear about today is the Language Access Bill, House Bill 1153. Joy Selby, take it away.
Thank you, Ivanova. Hi, everyone. I just want to give you a quick update on this. As you may remember, the Language Access Bill is designed to ensure that all families across the state are able to communicate with their school staff. So it includes immigrant and refugee families, blind and visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing families, and that makes up a pretty significant portion of families across the state, and that bill is doing well. We had our public hearing yesterday. It was very powerful testimony, well received, and so thank you everyone for all of your support, and we're looking on and hoping it gets passed very quickly out of House Education Committee and going into appropriations. And the one thing that I will say that has been a really inspirational highlight is that this bill has brought together people and organizations that aren't necessarily always with us advocating for disability justice issues. And so particularly like really diverse groups, bringing in communities of color, the BIPOC community. And so we just hope to continue sustaining those relationships and learning from each other so that they can join us in our advocacy efforts. Back to you, Ivanova.
Epic, that's really exciting stuff. Thank you. All right, so our next bill that we are really excited about, and this will complete our goal in ending some minimum wage, Senate Bill 5284. And we have the epic John Lemus to present on this wonderful bill. Take it away, John.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you all for taking the time to be here today. So we are moving forward on Senate Bill 5284. And this bill is all around ending subminimum wage in the state of Washington. So you may remember that we have tried doing a version of this bill in the last session in the House, and that bill really got changed so much that it was not what we wanted. It ended up only prohibiting state agencies from being able to pay subminimum wage. Now, the good news is that work was not in vain. Now, because the RHCs are no longer paying subminimum wages, the amount of 14C certificates that exist in our state are almost cut in half with the number of people who are receiving subminimum wage. So when the institutions were paying, the number was around 594. That number is now 184. So we are very excited. I just saw a thing in the comments that this is a priority of the Biden administration. We are trying to do this at the state level before the federal government tells us we have to. Number one, because we want to have Washington State chooses how it transitions. We have included a 2-year transition period within this bill, which we feel is more than enough time. So we are hoping that our bill comes up for a hearing next week. It was up for a hearing tomorrow, but as some of you may know, that got removed from the hearing calendar. So what I've been telling people is that's just how the cookie crumbles during the legislative session. We're hoping for some good news tomorrow when the new hearing calendars get released. So stay tuned. the Community Employment Alliance will work fast to get news out about a new hearing. We're looking for people to sign in pro on this bill. The strategic way that we're going about testimony is we're not having a lot of people testify, but we have come up with 2 really good panels, which include self-advocates, a business owner, a labor representative, and a business, sorry, yes. So exciting things happening. Either way, this is gonna happen, and we see it happening at the federal level in about 1 to 2 years. We've never had this much traction behind eliminating sub-minimum wage. So we're very, very happy with that. Additionally, Senator Murray just released the Raise the Wage Act again. That bill would also attempt to eliminate sub-minimum wage at the federal level, as well as raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So that's it for me. And we hope to have some more information out to you all tomorrow about a hearing.
Hey, John, this is Jeremy. I received a private chat that I think might have been intended for the whole group. So I just wanted to ask, what impact would this have on people who are participating in group-supported employment, GSE?
For them, this would mean that they would need to look at moving towards individual employment. As we know, the county is no longer supporting pre-voc. They are still funding group-supported employment. The organizations that are employing people at sub-minimum wage within GSE organizations could decide to rework their business models and pay people minimum wage or higher. And if they are not willing to do that, then we will have to work to transition people away from those jobs into something better in the community at minimum wage or higher.
Thank you, John, for your wonderful advocacy on this. Really exciting stuff. All right.
Nova.
Oh, yes.
This is Diana, and we have a special guest that has joined us. I would like everybody to welcome Senator Karen Kaiser, if you would.
Welcome, Senator. It's so good for you to be here. Thank you for joining us. Is there anything you would like to say? If you just want to watch, that's fine as well. And thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Max Friedel. I'm Senator Kaiser's session aide here on her behalf, but I will definitely relay all of your welcome to her as well. I appreciate all your advocacy.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, we're going to go on to our next bill, which will be the DD foster cares and House Bill 1061. Romana Hessendorf, will you like to come up and speak on this bill? Thank you.
Yes, I would absolutely like to speak on this bill. So 1061 is about youth who are in foster care, who are probably or found or who either are eligible for DDA supports or maybe eligible for DDA supports. And it's about helping them transition into the world after foster care. So right now what happens, Washington State doesn't allow people to be served both within the foster care system and within the DDA system. So you have a lot of people who are in foster care who would probably qualify for DDA supports when they leave, but they may not even know about DDA. or they may have been found eligible when they were a small child, but the eligibility wasn't kept up. And so they may be leaving foster care, not even knowing that there's supports out there. Or maybe they do know there's supports out there, but they're having a hard time applying and getting into DDA. And the upshot is that a lot of these people are becoming homeless because they're leaving a system, they're wards of the state, so they don't necessarily have a family support network around them. And so they're leaving state care and they're kind of going into a void. So this is an issue that some advocates started flagging a few years ago, along with some other issues around people with developmental disabilities in the foster care system. And they said, can we do something? Can we do something to help them transition into DDA supports? And the bill was heard, I think it was this week, maybe it was last week. The bill was heard. They are already executing it out of committee though. So the bill was heard, got a very strong, a good positive buzz around it. And there were a couple amendments proposed and they agreed to those, and they're good amendments. So here's what it does. It doesn't do everything everyone would like, but here's what it does. It requires, first of all, the Department of Children, Youth and Families, and they're the people who oversee foster care. It requires them to to identify and track who are the youth between the ages of 16 and 21 who are either eligible for DDA and are expectedly foster care, or who they know are. So either they're eligible or they're likely eligible. So it's having them starting to officially track who these kids are or who these young adults are. So that's number one thing they're going to do. And then they're going to start a planned meeting, like a kind of like a transition meeting. There's a lot of different transition meetings that different people have to do. And if you're a youth in the foster care system, there's also a transition meeting you have to do to plan for when you leave the foster care system. So this bill helps plan out like what's your future going to be like when you leave the foster care system. So they're going to have this meeting. And in this meeting, they'll talk about the help identify, like, are you eligible for DDA? Are you likely eligible? Should we get you assessed for DDA? And tell them about things like, what are employment supports? So they know that they could ask for that if they're eligible. Or, you know, what are community residential supports? If you're not eligible for community residential, which is a service you get at the core waiver, what are adult family homes? What are some different housing options that you can have? So it would require that. And then one of the asks that advocates made was that, is there a way that we can prioritize these young adults who are leaving foster care for DDA waivers? Because even if they identify them and while they're still in foster care, and even if they have these meetings that tell them about these services they might be eligible for, you know, those of us who are used to DDA know that there's a long waiting list to get into DDA, and being eligible doesn't mean you actually get your services. So originally, last session, we asked, well, can you set aside some waivers for these people? And that did not happen. But what they did agree to is they could prioritize. So for instance, if you guarantee them a waiver, but if they are eligible and if a waiver opens up, then people who left foster care within the last 2 years would basically be a higher priority for getting waiver slots. So that's what it does. And so it looks like it's going to pass out of committee. Either it did pass today or it's going to pass tomorrow out of committee, and hopefully go to the floor and it'll move over to the Senate.
So it looks like we have a couple of questions for you, Ramona. Yeah. Josie, would you like to ask your question? You can
I do have a question, but I also have a comment. I was in foster care. I could not leave at the age of 17. I had to leave at 18, even though I wanted to leave at 17. And I transitioned from foster care into adult family home. And even though I was 18, I was in DDA. It was called DDD with 3 Ds at the time. They do change their name. I had to do a test to see if I qualify for being disabled.
Yeah.
And so at the age of 18, from moving out of foster care into adult family home. And I did not get I did not get my first permit until I ran away from those adult family homes. So, I mean, the struggle is hard. But I mean, I've been there a long time ago, but I now live on my own and I am DDA. So I've been, you know, I've been very happy living on my own without being in an adult family home.
Yeah, and it's really good to, and that's something else I want to make sure I've noticed in this bill. They clarified that they, in this transition meeting, is that they could talk about both supports that are available through DDA or adult family home is an aging and long-term support services also, but also what some other housing options might be for people.
I've had friends who because I used to go back to my adult family or my old foster house, and she became one of my really good friends before she passed away. And she did have other kids who did transition from foster care, and some of them, like, since they have, I don't know if they have to make you do that test to identify if you are disabled or not, but some of the kids did not test very well or test higher than what they previously were when they first got into foster care, because me, my sister, and my brother all tested when we first got into foster care when I was 3, my sister was 6, and my brother was 8. So they all, when you first get into foster care, whatever age you are, they test you whether to see if you're disabled or not. And then when you leave foster care, they also want to retest you again. I don't know if that's a requirement for testing for the identification to see if you are disabled.
Do we have another person who would like to ask a question? Thank you, Josie. That was a really good comment. Arona, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes. My question is, when young people are leaving the foster care system much before their final year, there needs to be some discussion around employment supports don't start till age 21. So if they are thinking they're going to graduate at 18, then kind of to reset the sails, you know, so that they can take the classes necessary for, you know, the area of employment they're interested in, but at least wait till 21 to graduate from their special education program. And second thing is children. I used to be former children administration social worker, and you know, the social worker is required to do the transition plan every 6 months before, you know, when the person reaches 18 years, you know, and so that there is coordination with DDD or DDA needs to happen, pretty much required to, you know, do that transition.
Yeah, this would require them to start to make sure they have that meeting between 16 and 16 and a half. So my guess is that it was not consistently happening. And they also, if someone on here isn't aware, you can exit foster care at age 18, but there's also an option for extended foster care. Some people will stay within foster care system until age 21. Just so you know that. So this would make sure that at least by age 16, between 16 and 16 and a half, that they're having these conversations, because that would align with when they're also having your high school beyond planning and your transition planning in high school, to make sure that your transition services in high school are lining up to the foster care transition plan, and that people are aware of what is available when they are no longer in foster care.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Thank you, Ramona. Is there any other questions for Ramona? All right, I don't see any for now.
Excuse me, Ivan. This is Kyle. I have a back question regarding the sub-minimum wage. As you well know, there was a time, which is supposed to be tomorrow, that we're supposed to testify, and I know Karen has pulled it for some reason or another. The way that it's set up should be any advocate can come in and testify if they're pro, instead of saying only a certain amount of people. It's that way that the more they hear about it, the better.
I'd like to clarify. We are in no means telling people not to sign up to testify. CEA just is taking that strategic route of putting two really good panels together. A lot of the times when hearings come up, especially now that we're in a virtual world, if there are 50 to 100 people signed up to talk on one bill, then the committee will likely go longer and they will not get to the other bills that are on the agenda. So that's what we were thinking as we were moving forward, but by no means was I telling people not to sign up to give public testimony. Absolutely not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, John. And Kyle, thank you for your question. That's an important thing to get clarified. All right. So if it's okay, we move on to the next bill. We're going to talk, this bill is from the DD Ombuds, the Developmental Disability Ombuds, and it's Senate Bill 5213. And Betty Sweeterman will be presenting on this bill. So come on up, Betty. Uh-oh, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Now
yes.
We can hear you.
I was ready and waiting. Thank you very much, Ivanova, for that introduction. And I'm talking about Senate Bill 5213. So I am with the Office of Developmental Disability Ombuds, and our office has been in operation. The bill for our office passed in 2016. We've been in operation since 2017. And our duties include providing information on rights and responsibilities to people with developmental disabilities and their families, helping people with their concerns about their services, and helping people with and investigating complaints about services. And we also have a duty to monitor the service systems that serve people with developmental disabilities, to gather that information, to make reports to the state and to the legislature, and give recommendations for improvements of those services. So this bill, after working for a while, you know that in 2016, DSHS also housed the Children's Administration and the Mental Health, Department of Mental Health. And so since then, those agencies have moved out. And so it's a whole different scenario, as you all know, that, you know, certain healthcare is turned into managed care, and it's the behavioral health care is part of that system. And so it's a more complicated system than it used to be. You know, more services used to be housed within DDA. So even since then, in that short period of time. So when the bill was originally crafted, it talked about interactions with DSHS and with the Department of Health. And so what we're proposing in this bill is to clarify that language that enables then DDA and the Department of Children, Youth and Families, the Healthcare Authority, to be able to provide information to us, just like they would have been if they were in DSHS. So that's one piece of it. And the other piece is to clarify the language to ensure that the DD ombuds can reach out to people who are receiving services from state certified or state contracted providers, so that we can reach everyone. And so part of our duties is to reach out to people, and we can't do that unless we know who they are and where they are. And we're really wanting to reach people that are not connected to the, typical advocacy groups. We know that there's a lot of people that are out there that need our services, and we want to connect with them. Those are the two main pieces of this legislation. And we know that there have been some issues raised and I appreciate that people have raised some issues around kind of what we're trying to do here and have brought those to us. And we're talking to people and clarifying our intent. And even though our statute looks clear, it's not a real clear. So it's really takes us a good conversation to explain to people what our duties are, what our authority is, and how we go about implementing that. We have really strict confidentiality requirements. We have really, requirements about when we can do an investigation and when we can access information. So we're hoping that this bill will pass and that people will have better access to us, because that's really the big goal of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Does anybody have any questions for Betty? Going once, going twice.
I got one.
All right, Kyle, go for it.
Hey, Betty, does this include it? Because I know we talked about it during the DD Ombudsman's advisory meeting about what was it? The releases that, so that during an investigation sometimes you don't have to get those extra releases, go through the middle guy or something like that.
So thanks, Kyle. I mean, every situation is different. I want to say that. And one of the things that's really unique about this, creating the DD Ombuds is that there was recognition that, there were, when it was originally created, there was just recognition that sometimes there's going to be instances where people don't have anyone in their lives to support them. They don't have a decision maker, and they may not be able to make decisions to consent or sign a release of information. So that it's important to have someone that can come in and ask questions, see what's going on, help the person get the services that they need. And we've worked with people, and I think I've given this example, we've worked with people where parent guardians have suddenly passed away, or a person ends up in the hospital and they are deemed not able to give consent, and they don't have a guardian yet. And so we're able to help, kind of rally the system to support that person and get things in place.
All right, thank you for your question, Kyle. And anyone else have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, let's, I don't know who rose their hand first, so let's go with Eric and then Michelle.
This will be quick, but I'm just wondering with that bill that Betty was talking about, is there going to be any hearings on that bill anytime soon?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Eric. The hearing is on Friday at 8 a.m.
Friday at 8, okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Michelle, you're next.
Thank you. Betty, I just wanted to ask if, say a self-advocate is in a group home or in sharing a home with someone and they're not getting along with their, the person that they've been matched with, that they're not compatible. Is this something that the ombudsman would work with?
Yes, it's definitely something we've had, we have worked with people in that situation. Yes, we have. So
okay.
It would be, yep.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Betty. That was really awesome. Okay, if there's no other questions for Betty, we will move on to our next bill, the Fair Start for Kids Act, Senate Bill 5237 and House Bill 1213. Adrian Stewart will be presenting on this bill. Take it away, Adrian.
Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm, Ivanova. Thank you. So as you mentioned, the Fair Start for Kids Act is one of the few bills in the session this year that has a companion. So that means that there's one starting in the House and there's one starting in the Senate, and they're exactly the same. I'm not sure which one is going to be the mover as they go forward. I have my eye on it. But some of us testified on the bill last week. It's currently neither one of them are scheduled for executive sessions yet, but my fingers are crossed. But basically, one of the things I'm trying to do this session is look at bills and apply a disability analysis or lens to it and figure out. A lot of times, we weren't invited to the table to discuss how the bill could be built in the first place for kids or for people with developmental disabilities. So we have to go back and retrofit the bill, right, or the ship after it's already been built, and that can be difficult. So same thing kind of with this bill. We came in late to the game, and this bill is about expanding accessible, affordable childcare and early childhood programs to kids with for all kids. Okay, but I came in, as did some others, and said, hey, what about kids with disabilities? And so we know that's important to do early on, because once you start segregating kids at 3 years old, that teaches them and it teaches their families that we as society expect them to be segregated all throughout school, right? And so it's important for us to advocate for all of our kids to have accessible, integrated early childcare and early learning opportunities to make sure that kids have the best shot at staying integrated with their peers all throughout the K through 12 education system. Hopefully then that teaches us that we can fully integrate people with developmental disabilities into our communities, right? And we no longer need institutions. We no longer need, segregated settings for people. It's not even on our radar. So that's my goal. And so with this bill in particular, it goes a long way to try and make childcare more affordable for people. There's some tiered approaches in the bill that say, okay, if your family earns, this much below the federal poverty level, then you get this subsidy, and this much below, then this subsidy. And so that's great. We are expanding it for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford childcare, which is great. It also has some language in the bill regarding training, which I'm definitely keeping my eyes on, because I know that in our community, we have lots of experiences and feelings with trainings that aren't necessarily beneficial to our community. And so I want to make sure that that doesn't get replicated in other in other areas. But mainly this is for kids 3 to 5 years old who aren't yet in school, obviously, but there's kind of this gap in services. So birth to 3, you know, does their thing, but I mean, really right on the 3rd birthday, they say you're done and you don't get services anymore. Okay. And so so this bill looks to expand coverage of care for all kids, not just kids with disabilities. But I have asked Senator Wilson to make sure that right now there's the definition of an eligible child includes kids who would be eligible for special education preschool due to a disability. Now, that's great, but you know, for kids who don't get an official diagnosis until they're 5 or 7 or 10, that's going to be difficult. And then there's other kids in other marginalized communities for whatever reason can't get an official disability diagnosis, and that would still exclude them from coverage under this bill. So there are some requests into Senator Wilson. I'm hopefully meeting with her tonight to discuss the specifics, so that's the basic theme of the bill, and it's a big bill, but I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability if anybody has any.
Does anyone have any questions for Adrian? Thank you, Adrian.
Adrian, there's a question in the chat for you. How does this affect training for providers so that all daycare is available for everyone?
Training for providers. So that I don't think I understand the question. So I'll answer that to the best that I can, Teresa Ann. And then maybe if you have another follow-up question, I can take it offline. But DCYF is charged under the bill with implementing training for child care providers. And it's supposed to be like credit bearing, but education kind of in a community-based setting. This bill doesn't achieve universal preschool for everybody, which is my own personal dream. But you know, universal preschool for everybody would necessarily get all kids into an integrated setting, right? Because once you provide that service for everybody, then you've got to make sure that kids are fully integrated. So this bill doesn't do that, but it's a start. And so, you know, technically, I mean, this bill doesn't offer daycare for all kids, unfortunately. It just expands it. And if that's not helpful, feel free to ping me offline, okay? I want to make sure I'm answering questions.
You're doing great, Adrian. Thank you.
Thanks, Ivanova. I'm taking you with me all throughout my day, my cheerleader.
All right. Does anyone else have any comments or questions, or is it okay if we move on to the next bill? I'm not hearing any resistance. I am going to move us on to our last bill of interest, and this will be the Ruckelshaus report, Senate Bill 5268. Jeremy and Stacy, will you like to take it away?
Sure, thanks, Ivanova. Well, Senate Bill 5268 is, in a sense, a companion to a new report that was released just yesterday, which is the second Ruckelshaus report. So this deserves a little bit of history. Many of you might recall that the state legislature paid a special sort of a brain trust at the University of Washington called the Ruckelshaus, well, it's not the Ruckelshaus Committee, the Ruckelshaus, well, it's a think tank. And they, for 2 years, talked about rethinking developmental disabilities and the future of our RHCs. And that report came out last legislative session, and a bill was put into place to continue that work group and to continue efforts to make sure that the recommendations in that report came alive. And the second report from that work group was just released yesterday, and I think Diana's got it in the chat now. And this bill, 5268, is to try again to bring to life some of those recommendations. The sponsors of this bill are Senator Kaiser, Senator Braun, and Senator Nguyen. And we saved the longest for last. It's an 11-page bill that has 3 main sections. The first section is got quite a lot in it. It talks about caseload forecasting, so predicting what services are going to be needed in 2 of our waivers, the IFS waiver and the Basic Plus waiver. It puts those costs into the governor's budget. It also predicts and asks the state to look at how many SOLAs would be needed to provide services for individuals. It looks at how many respite beds might be needed in our state. It does a Medicaid rate study. It looks at reducing case management ratios down to 35 people to 1 case manager for everyone. It asks for defining some quality assurance measures across programs and residential settings. And it asks JLARC and the Developmental Disabilities Administration to identify best practices and relook at their eligibility process. So that's a lot just in section 1. We're very interested, of course, in what each of those things would do to help us better plan for and expand the kinds of services that are available to people in our state. The second part of the bill is really focused on defining more the intent of the bill and making sure that the Developmental Disabilities Administration is working with the Developmental Disabilities Council to facilitate statewide conversations about best practices for children who are duly diagnosed and adults. So people who have developmental disabilities and experience behavioral health needs, in addition to some other topics. So that's a very exciting bit of conversation to have. And then the third part of this bill is very much focused on the future of our ICFs. So most people know that those are settings that are for people who have more intense needs that are in our RHCs. For many of you, you know that our RHCs have both ICFs, that's a licensure classification, and nursing home. And so some of what's in there is to look at the long-term use of those facilities and those programs and making the transition from making them long-term residential to short-term crisis stabilization. In addition, it talks a little bit about ensuring that families and individuals immediately have access to information about discharge planning and moving out into the community. That's very positive. And then expanding and looking at family mentors and peer mentors for people with individuals with developmental disabilities who live in an ICF or an RHC. And then the last part of this is to look at a redesign overall of the ICF system. So it's a pretty complex bill. We in the advocacy community have been looking to talk with all 3 of the sponsors about what their vision is for this bill, what they hope to achieve with it, and how we can contribute to the conversation to make sure that this bill really does what it intends to do, which is look at expanding services for people in our state and looking carefully at the future of institutions and ensuring that our services are based in the community. One of the interesting things in the bill is also to look at where we might provide nursing level care across our state. I forgot to mention that. And as you know, that has been a topic of particular interest and intense discussion in our community, whether or not we should build a large nursing facility in one area of the state, or whether or not we should look more carefully at smaller, more regional facilities that would provide nursing level care to people with developmental disabilities. So we're glad that the bill talks about continuing that conversation. So with that, Jeremy, I'm wondering if you might add or fill in anything I might have forgotten or add more perspective to this bill.
Thank you, Stacy. That was an excellent overview, and I will just emphasize three things. Since the original report was released last year, there are three things that have been very clear in talking with our community. The first is that people with developmental disabilities were not included in those conversations to create the recommendations in the way that they needed to be. And so as a result, we have a lot of recommendations. Some of them are really good. Some of them we don't agree with. But because people with disabilities were not included, it's very difficult for people to trust those recommendations or to want to support them. And so we've been working very hard since then, all of us, in correcting that, making sure that all of the conversations about this issue include people with developmental disabilities and that their voices are just as active and powerful as everyone else at the table. The second thing we heard loud and clear is that we as a community do not support building a large 120-bed nursing facility on the grounds of Fircrest, which was one of the recommendations. That has been loud and clear across the community, and we have made it clear the last several months and even last week and the week before that we do not support that in the capital budget. And the third thing that was loud and clear is that there are a lot of really great recommendations in the report about expanding the community capacity, increasing residential rates, more waiver spots, collaboration. There's a lot of great stuff in there. So I think the interesting things about this bill is, number one, there's nothing in there that creates a nursing facility. When it talks about the nursing facility in this bill, it's creating another task force to continue discussing the issue. And the task force would hear input from stakeholders, a diverse group of stakeholders, including people with disabilities. And the other thing is that it takes a lot of the really great community-based recommendations and puts them into a bill form. So we're still learning more this week about the bill and what it would do. In fact, we have a meeting with Senator Kaiser's office on Thursday to learn more. But I just wanted to emphasize those three things because I think they're really important to understand how that all fits together. And I know that we're short on time, but if there's anyone who wants to talk more about this issue or hear more about the backstory or ways to get involved, please feel free to contact us and we'll be happy to do that.
I was going to add, Jeremy, real quick. One of the things that we know is missing would be a contemplation of predicting as well how many core waivers are needed and that supported living be included in the planning. And that was sort of a notable piece that was missing from the bill that we'll be talking to sponsors about.
Stacey, have you seen a fiscal note for the bill? I just saw Karen's question and I don't have it.
I just looked to see if there were any updates and I didn't see anything about a fiscal note.
And there's not a public hearing yet either.
No hearing yet.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Any more other questions for them? Okay, if there are none, then we will do another fun poll with Diana.
Okay, so we're going to think about what would be the best theme song title for this legislative session. So you've got your choice from 6 different song titles: Imagine by John Lennon, Respect by Aretha Franklin, What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong, A Time for Us, Johnny Mathis, We Are the Champions by Queen, or Everybody Hurts by REM. So we'll give you another 35 seconds or so to make your choice. What do you think would be the best theme song title for this session?
A lot of great choices.
Yeah, it just kind of depends upon how things go this session. You know, the budget, we still don't know until the revenue forecast comes out in March as to how good or bad it will be for state revenue. And that'll play a big part in how this session goes. Since that's the one thing they do have to provide is a balanced budget by the end of session. Okay, it looks like everybody's got their answers in. And respect. I think a lot of people are looking for respect from legislators for the advocates that are out here working. And the Imagine by John Lennon came in a close second, and We Are the Champions. So great work, everybody.
Great work,
we'll see
everyone.
how we match up to these answers.
RESSBT, that's what respect means to me.
There you
Great
go.
song. It's a great song. That is great. Thank you so much. And that will end our bills of interest. I will give Jeremy the chance to do the Governor Inslee's proposed capital budget.
Thank you,
Thank
Ivanova.
you.
We are on to our third and final chapter for the briefing today. Thanks everyone for your questions and comments and hanging in there. This has been great. So like Ivanova said, we're gonna have 3 different presentations about the capital budget. And if you remember what I said at the beginning, the budget has 2 parts. Operating, which is all the stuff it takes to pay people's salaries and for the programs and services. And then you have capital, which is buildings and stuff that's like physical that you can touch. And so we're gonna hear about a few different parts of the proposed capital budget. And first, I'd like to welcome Jacob Pollowitz, who's going to talk about the Housing Trust Fund. Go ahead, Jacob.
Actually, this is his dad, Michael, the weaker half of the Pollowitz family.
Welcome, Michael. It's all yours.
Your boss. I apologize, I'm on the phone, so I will do the best I can here. The Developmental Disabilities Set Aside is funding used exclusively to develop affordable, accessible housing. The funding comes out of the capital budget, as Jeremy mentioned, not the operating budget, and is given out through a competitive application process through the State Housing Trust Fund. This funding is just for the physical building, not for any services. The governor's budget this year includes $240 million for housing, but does not identify specific funding priorities or groups. Historically, legislators have taken some of the governor's housing budget to fund the Developmental Disability Set Aside, usually for $5 million for the biennium. It is critically important that advocates and other stakeholders contact legislators with a recommendation to put $7 million into the set aside. I know there are some other folks that want money, more money than that, but this is what we've put together so far. There is a 1-page document included in the CAC legislative notebook that has more details to help you better understand the set aside if you need it, and to share the 1-pager with legislators. And I just want to say one last thing. So when folks start talking about services for people leaving the RHC or starting a children's SOLA, all of that is great on the operating side, but invariably, all these new services and opportunities for people typically all need housing. And the Developmental Disabilities Set Aside is certainly eligible to use some of that money to support people leaving RHC, starting children's SOLA, and other projects. That is my presentation.
Thank you, Michael, so much. And just to connect the dots here, what you were saying about building in the community, you know, a couple of weeks ago when many of us testified before the Capital Budget Committee, our message was, we do not want you to build a gigantic nursing facility for people with disabilities. Instead, one thing you could do is invest in the Housing Trust Fund, specifically the DD Set Aside, because that would help us to actually create the physical buildings, the houses that people need for adult family homes, for supported living homes, for SOLAs. Because if we don't make that investment, people won't have the opportunities to live in the community. So it's incredibly important. Michael, I'm not seeing any chat questions, but if anyone reaches out to us with questions about the Housing Trust Fund, we'll be happy to make the connection with you. All right. So
great,
now,
appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And say hi to Jacob for us. Next, it's my pleasure to invite Alex Mottler up to the stage, who is going to talk to us about the residential habilitation centers, RHCs, which we often refer to as institutions. So Alex, it's all you.
My name is Alex Mottler. I am the policy coordinator for SAIL. Don't repair old residential habilitation centers, known as RHCs. People with developmental disabilities want to live in the community, yet funding for community housing is being proposed to go to antiquated RHCs. On the Fircrest, Yakima, Rainier and Lakeland Village campuses, we see millions of dollars in the proposed capital budget to try to upgrade these facilities and keep the people living there. Since the number of people living in the institutions continues to decline, it doesn't make sense to upgrade these facilities. On these properties, we oppose the funding that is being used to study and upgrade buildings beyond what is required to keep the residents safe. We don't need to continually spend money on state institutional buildings when living in the community is what people want. We question the need to complete another master plan and rezone for Fircrest. We don't need to spend money year after year to keep changing the plan. We also question the need for the Fircrest School Infrastructure Water System Comprehensive Plan, as the money could be better spent on community-based housing. With a nursing home project in question, advocates want the money to pay for community housing, not a comprehensive water system plan. We are opposed to the many improvements that would go beyond just bringing the institutions up to code. While the residents must be kept safe, these facilities are intermediate care centers that should not be a place for long-term comfort for people with disabilities. It is not acceptable that money is pouring into the institutions when the community can house a client for much cheaper. This even includes Yakima, where we support the new solar farm. A case for not repairing these institutions can especially be made when we look at Reiner School. This site is being downsized, and part of it is out of compliance with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, so it does not even get federal matching funds. The operating costs are state-only dollars, whereas community services do get a federal match. It just does not make sense to repair deteriorating buildings at Rainier. Our opposition aims at both the $8 million proposed to upgrade cottages and the $2 million for roofing repairs. Instead of upgrading, we want to get people out of these living arrangements and into supportive community housing. This only adds to the urgency we need to move people from institutions to community housing. By closing institutions and moving people into the community, we can save money and improve lives. This makes even more sense this year as COVID has put a strain on our budget. Spending almost $30 million on plans and old buildings does not help our community.
Thank you, Alex. Very, very well said. And if I could channel Mike Raymond for a second and say, it's time to shut him down, I know that's probably what he would say if he were here. And Alex, I really appreciate your explanation of that. Just think of what we could do if we could take the tens and tens of millions of dollars that are being that are being spent to keep these buildings together, and instead that could be invested in the community. Just think what we could do. I saw that Josie has her hand up, and I think Robert also wanted to say something. Josie, do you want to go first?
my question is, what are RHCs? I've noticed that you guys are using that I guess acronym, but what are they?
That's a good question, Josie. RHC stands for Residential Habilitation Center, and there are 4 of them around the state, and they usually include different parts: an intermediate care facility and a nursing facility, most of them. But really, another word for RHC is institution. And so when you hear us talking about closing RHCs or people transitioning out of RHCs, what we're talking about is closing institutions.
So I have another question, Jeremy, for you. While you're explaining that, are you also talking about closing Western State, which is in Stilcombe, Washington?
Well, when we talk about RHCs, we're not talking specifically about Western State, although I know that is an important issue to a lot of people. And I am not an expert on Western State, but I know there's a lot of people out there who have some real concerns about that facility.
Western State.
Yeah.
Okay. My other question is, I'm in a agency named Northwest Services for Independent Living. They help me within the community. They have 2 different programs. One is ITS, which is for wheelchair bound, and which is normally 24-hour care. And the other is community living, which I'm in. So they're 2 sides of their office. And I'm also on Pierce County Housing. Is this bill going to help both all the agencies in? I mean, there's probably a lot of I know there's a lot of agencies here in Pierce County, and I know there's a few in King County. But are you wanting, is this bill for the agencies or for the housing, for housing, like Pierce County Housing or King County Housing, or I don't know if they're Thurston County Housing? I mean, is this bill for that, or is it for community settings living?
Well, Josie, there's a few different bills here, so it'll take us, some time to kind of go through each of the bills and talk about how they would affect different agencies. And we would be happy to do that. If you want to email me, Josie, or call me, we can set up some time to talk. I also see that Daria has offered to talk with you about closing Western State Hospital. I know that Daria and DRW talk a lot about that issue, so they're a great resource.
I do know that they did close down a part of Rainier School because my brother used to live there, and they only closed down part of it. They didn't close down the whole thing. Because I did advocate for my brother to move out of Rainier School because my brother was in there at one time in his life. And I'm glad that he was able to move, and the residents that lived with him in the Rainier School, a part of them did and a part of them did not.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of people who have transitioned out of Rainier, and there are some people who still live there. Josie, thank you for sharing. We're short on time, so unfortunately,
I was just asking. I'm sorry.
No, no need to be sorry whatsoever. They're excellent questions, and any of us would be happy to keep talking with you about those issues. We just have a couple more things to get through.
Okay.
Before I do that, Robert, did you have a quick question you wanted to ask?
Yes. If I have to, I can call and set up some time with you about the Rainier and about some other stuff later.
Yeah, absolutely. You can set up some time with me. I know there's also some groups that are working on this, like the Shut Them Down Coalition and other advocacy groups too. So there's a lot of places to talk about this issue. All right, speaking of Daria, I mentioned her name just a minute ago. That's a good segue to introduce Daria Farivar, who works for DRW, and she is going to talk about the 120-bed nursing facility that had been proposed to be built at Fircrest that we talked about a few minutes ago. So Daria, I'm going to hand it over to you to present.
Thanks, Jeremy. Hey, folks. Daria with DRW. For those of you who don't know, I am the new Public Policy Director. I'm sure many of you know David Lord. I think David Lord might actually be here today listening, which is great. So I'm moving into that role this session, and it is a big role to fill. So I appreciate everyone's grace with me as I figure out how to navigate it. Jeremy, you and Stacy and Alex made my job really easy because you talked about all of the really important points about that proposed segregated nursing home that would go into Furcrest. So I will talk really briefly and maybe help us get back on schedule. So as we mentioned, it's a 120-bed nursing facility that is going to be segregated, meaning it would only be for folks with developmental disabilities. So a concern for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that it's going to be on the grounds of a place where there have been decades and decades of trauma for folks with developmental disabilities, and we don't want to perpetuate that trauma. The other thing I really want to highlight about this nursing home that I don't think has been said yet is a lot of folks believe that folks with complex or significant needs can only be served in institutions and in congregate care settings, and that's not true. We actually have reports and information from DSHS that shows otherwise, that folks do better in the community when they're with their natural supports, when they have access to the community. So I wanted to throw those out there. The nursing home is going to cost about $120 million. As folks have already mentioned, that is going to go much farther and serve our community much better if we are building housing and building up our community supports on both of that capital and operating side of the budget. Last thing I will just mention briefly, besides some of the repairs that need to happen to the RHCs and the proposed nursing facility, there's also $40 million in the capital budget for the adult training program. This is essentially a sheltered workshop, a place where folks learn about how to do things like shred paper and get some vocational skills. Traditionally, some of those folks have been paid, but I'm unclear as to whether that's happening right now. But again, $40 million that would better serve this community in the community and getting folks the supports that they can and should be accessing in the community. So that is my short pitch. Happy to answer questions. My email is in the chat. Don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Daria, so much. I think that was an excellent way to cap off our presentations. So I'll give people a chance to raise their hand or chat if they have any questions for you. But in the meantime, I just want to remind you that this entire program is being recorded, and we're going to post it along with the agenda on the website that Diana put in the chat box. It's www.arcwa.org on the Advocacy Day page. And another reminder is at 5:30 tonight, we have our annual legislative reception. It's the 40th annual legislative reception. So I know a lot of us are going to be there, and that is a cross-disability event. There are going to be more than 400 people there, along with several dozen legislators. So very exciting. And so I know that a lot of us are going to head on over there after we get a bite to eat. And I say head on over there, but really we're probably going to be sitting the same spots we're sitting now. But anyway, I'm going to see if there's any questions here. Diana, any reminders I'm missing about today or tonight?
Nope, I think you've got it. And I'm going to just try and get a couple last polls in.
Okay,
that we'd like to get some information from people. So,
and Krista has a question. If maybe after this poll, we can get to Krista's question.
Okay, sounds good. So for next year, and that's assuming once COVID-19 has gone away, we want to find out from you whether you would like Advocacy Days to be in person, virtual by Zoom, or be a combination of both. So here's your chance to voice your opinion.
It's not letting me vote, but my vote would be both.
Yeah, Ivanova, you and I don't get to vote because we're co-hosts, so we just have to watch everyone else vote.
Well, I'll give my vote verbally. I want both.
Perfect.
Well, right now, 82% agree with you, Ivanova, so that seems pretty overwhelming as the choice everybody's wanting. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end that poll.
Krista, do you want to go ahead and ask your question while Diana's getting ready for the second poll?
Well, it's obvious, Diane. It's because it's accessible to 100% of everybody.
Right.
All right. Krista, go ahead and ask your question.
So my question's about nursing homes and nursing home care. And we talk about ways people get it outside of institutions. And I'm wondering what the barriers are and why people can't get it outside of institutions, and if there's a process that's being undertaken to solve that dilemma, because segregated facilities just seems like segregation, which is not a good thing.
Well, Krista, I'll give you my short response, but it's just my response. And I know that lots of other people have an opinion about this, so we can continue it. But I think part of it is a misperception issue. I think out there's a lot of people who think that you have to live in a big nursing facility to get nursing care. And we know that's not true. There are lots of examples of people who receive nursing level of care, very intensive nursing level of care in homes, in the community. We see examples of that happening in adult family homes and supported living homes and SOLAs. So I think part of it's just a perception of helping to show people and convince people that it's not a big place. It's a type of care that you can get, and it should be in the most person-centered, integrated setting possible. And I think the second thing is the availability of those homes. You know, if there are people who have been traditionally receiving care in a big facility and they want to receive it somewhere else, if there physically aren't places for them to live and receive that, that's an issue. And so that's why we talk about the Housing Trust Fund. It's why we talk about building SOLAs and, you know, supporting the supported living provider network so that they can have more homes. You know, it's really a big puzzle that we have to expand. So that's my 2-minute version. Happy to talk more about that, obviously. But I want to make sure that we get to our second poll question and then end, because, well, personally, I have to hit the road to pick up my daughter and get home for the next event.
Okay, so this next poll, this has been an unusual situation for all of us over the last year, and we've had to do virtual meetings instead of in-person meetings. So I want to find out how many of these things have you used for this last year in doing your virtual meetings? There's Zoom, there's Teams, there's Skype. Those are 3 of the platforms that have been used most. And then closed captioning or live streaming on Facebook or YouTube are also options that get used. So just let us know which of these things are something that you use and that have been useful to you during this last year of virtual meetings.
Can I add one that I didn't see on the list?
Sure. Who is speaking, please?
Oh, sorry. This is Tim Mckee from the DD Ombuds office.
Hi, Tim.
Yeah. So some of the folks that I've been working with this year have really been enjoying using Google Meet a lot. That's not what I use to initiate meetings, but I know a lot of people seem to have been they really seem to like using that. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end this. Obviously, a lot of people have used Zoom. I think it is probably the major one that people use and access. Teams, that one is starting to be more used. And I know that within the legislature and the governor's office, they like the Teams platform. And then Skype, the Developmental Disabilities Administration typically uses Skype for their meetings. And we've seen some with closed captioning, some streaming on Facebook and YouTube. So it's good to have these numbers. It helps us determine what's going to be most useful to people as we continue this until we can get back into in-person meetings. So I think we're wrapping it up here. And Jeremy, Stacy, Ivanova, do you have any of you guys have anything else to say?
I just want to say thank you again. This is an amazing community. I'm so fortunate to be a part of it and to be working alongside you all. And I can't wait to see some of you a little bit later tonight and then the rest of you for the rest of legislative session. Stacy, Ivanova, anything you want to say?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you at more Advocacy Days. We're going to have these every Wednesday, but it will be at 10 a.m. in the morning, not 2 p.m. So that's just something to remember for the next Advocacy Day that is coming up. It will be on community housing and supports. So, you know, it's next Wednesday at 10 a.m. You do have to register. So you just go to the ARCA Washington website and you can just register like you did for this meeting. And I believe there's a link to the registration also in the Facebook invites if you use those. So thank you so much for everyone. And if you have any other lasting questions, you know, please contact myself or anyone else here that is willing to have that contact, like Jeremy and Stacy and every others like Diana. We're all happy to help and help us get through this wonderful session. So go out and advocate, everybody, and hope to see you at that reception.
Thank you, Diana, Ivanova, everybody for putting this together. Too, I'll just add one final thing. We are working on getting some of the virtual advocacy days available to be interpreted in Spanish. If you are interested in that, please contact me. And again, we hope everybody has a good night. We'll see you in just another hour or so. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.